Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to part 2 of Why Do Some Brains Enjoy Fear? Now, remember, the whole purpose for us to read this article is to provide us with some good quotes to help us when we answer our essay question, which is, of course, how does fear cause people to act negatively or stupidly? Or how does just fear affect people negatively or in negative ways? We read yesterday the first 5 paragraphs, and we came across a good 4 or 5 quotes, which showed us, which proved that everybody feels fear. In fact, that fear causes a chemical that happens in the brain, which causes a flashbulb memory or a triggering effect, which sticks with people throughout their lives, and it makes them feel that fear, even though they understand that it's not necessarily real, but because they were traumatized when they were young, it affects them so much. So a great quote would be, consider the following quote. I would give that quote, and then I would say something like, this quote clearly shows that fear causes everybody to act in a certain way because of something called dopamine and also because of the flashbulb memories. So we got some good quotes yesterday. Now today, we're going to finish this essay up. It's about another 6 or 7 paragraphs. We're going to look for another 4 quotes, which are talking about fear affecting people negatively or causing them to do dumb things. And we're going to annotate those notes clearly. Now know this, as we're reading, I'm going to do the same thing I did yesterday. I'm going to stop every time I come across what I think is a great quote. I'm going to talk to you about it. I'm going to explain it. I'm even going to annotate it for you. This quote clearly shows, and you can every time copy down the quotes that I give in your 4 quotes that you need to do for now. In fact, let's take a look at tonight's or today's homework, which is simply just like yesterday. This is Why Do Some Brains Enjoy Fear? Annotations number 2. Same thing as yesterday. You're going to give me the quote. After consider the following quote, and then you're going to give me an annotation. You're going to say this quote clearly shows. Now make sure in your quote you're citing it correctly, and that's simply just putting the page number down at the bottom or at the end of the quote, or you could put why do some brains enjoy fear in the parentheses as well. You choose how you want to cite it. It's fine for me, but make sure each quote is cited and each quote is annotated. Last thing I want to say, let's go back to where we were. You can see me. The last thing I want to say is that you don't have to choose the quotes that I think are great quotes. If you find a quote in this that you think is a great quote dealing with fear, annotate it and quote it yourself. I don't have to tell you how to do this. And as we move forward, I'm going to tell you less and less what I think, and I'm going to assume and hope that you're pointing out the things that you think to me. So let's go. But today I will point out to you the 4 or 5 quotes that I think are important. I will point out the annotations. What I will not do, however, is type them out so that we don't waste too much time. You, when I get to those quotes, if you like them, pause my reading, type in your annotation, and then come back, and we'll be right back where you left off. And of course, you could do that anytime that you find a quote that you like that I don't point out myself. So let's go. Paragraph number 6. What qualities do scary things share across cultures, or does it vary widely? One of the most interesting things about studying fear is looking at the social constructions of fear and learned fears versus those fears that appear to be more innate or even genetic. Now, I just want to point that out. She said that some fears appear to be innate or even genetic. Now, what that means is, and that's a great quote, consider the following quote, that some fears appear to be innate or even genetic. And what that quote clearly shows is there's nothing that a human being can do to stop themselves from feeling fear, that it's totally natural and unavoidable. Let's continue. When we look across time and across the world, we find that people truly can become afraid of anything. Through fear conditioning, connecting a neutral stimulus with a negative consequence, we can link pretty much anything to a fear response. Baby Albert, of course, is the exemplar case of this. Now, I've heard of Baby Albert in a bunch of psychology classes that I took in college. You'll probably hear about it again. You may have even heard about him before. Listen to what happened to Baby Albert. The poor child was made deathly afraid of white rabbits in the 1920s, before researchers were required to be ethical. So we know that we can learn to fear. And this means our socialization and the society in which we are raised is going to have a lot to do with what we find scary. Great quote. Consider the following quote. So we know that we can learn to fear. And that means our socialization and the society in which we are raised is going to have a lot to do with what we find scary. So this quote clearly shows that our culture molds our fear responses and experiences. Our environment, our family, just like I told you yesterday that my brother molded my fear responses by messing with me when I was a kid. So now I have these distinct fear responses that were molded by my Not very nice, brother. Let's continue. Each culture has its own superhero monsters. The chupacabra in South America, the Loch Ness monster, the yokai, which is a supernatural monsters from Japanese folklore. The Alps, German nightmare creatures, but they all have a number of characteristics in common. Monsters are defying the general laws of nature in some way. They have either returned from the afterlife, like ghosts, demons, or spirits, or they're some kind of non-human or semi-human creature. This speaks to the fact that things that violate the laws of nature are terrifying. And really anything that doesn't make sense or causes us some sort of dissonance, whether it's cognitive or aesthetic, is going to be scary. Axe-wielding animals, masked faces, contorted bodies. That was a great quote. Listen carefully. Consider the following quote. And really anything that doesn't make sense or causes us some sort of dissonance, whether it is cognitive or aesthetic, is going to be scary. Axe-wielding animals, masked forces, contorting bodies. So this quote clearly shows that fear is a natural cause or a natural effect in human beings, and it's caused often by things we don't understand or things that we've never come across before. They scare us. Great quote. Let's continue. Another shared characteristic of monsters across the globe is their blurred relationship with death and the body. Take a listen to this quote. Humans are obsessed with death. We simply have a hard time wrapping our minds around what happens when we die. Great quote. Consider the following quote. Humans are obsessed with death. We simply have a hard time wrapping our mind around what happens when we die. This quote clearly shows that the reason why people are so afraid of death is because they don't understand it and they don't know what happens to us. So one of the reasons why we feel fear is because we come across things that we don't understand. And what's more ununderstandable than death? We don't know it until we experience it. So we don't know what we're going to deal with, so it scares us. Great quote. Let's continue. This contemplation has led to some of the most famous monsters, with each culture creating their own version of the living dead, whether it's zombies, vampires, reanimated and reconstructed corpses, or even ghosts. We want to imagine a life that goes on after we die. Here's another great quote. I have it highlighted and I have it annotated. As you can see, I'm not just making this stuff. As I read, I annotate and I highlight. Let's go. Or better yet, figure out a way to live forever. Again, though, we would violate the laws of nature and therefore is terrifying. Okay, great quote. Consider the following quote. Or better yet, figure out a way to live forever. Again, though, that would violate the laws of nature and is therefore terrorizing. So sometimes we do dumb things. So I would say my note would be this quote clearly shows that sometimes we do dumb things when we're afraid, specifically because of our fear of death. So to keep ourselves from dying, people might do a really dumb thing because they're afraid of dying. Let's continue. So while the compositions and names of the monsters are different, the motivations and inspirations behind their constructions appear across the globe. Let's continue. What are some of the early examples of people scaring themselves on purpose? Humans have been scaring themselves and each other since the birth of the species, though all kinds of methods like storytelling, jumping off cliffs, and popping out to startle each other from the recesses of some dark cave. And we've done this for lots of different reasons: to build group unity, to prepare kids for life in the scary world, and of course, to control their behavior. But it's only really in the last few centuries that scaring ourselves for fun and profit has become a highly sought after experience. My favorite example of one of the early discoveries of the joys of self-scaring is actually found in the history of roller coasters. The Russian ice slides began, not surprisingly given the name, as extended sleigh rides down a snowy mountain in the mid-17th century. How many people knew that roller coasters started from Russians actually going sleigh riding, and then someone was like, oh, we could build a track and scare the poop out of people? And that's why they did that, because people like to be scared if it's a controlled situation. Let's continue. Much like they do today, riders would sit in sleds and speed down the mountain, which sometimes included additional man-made bumps to make it a little more exciting. The Russian ice slides became more sophisticated throughout the 18th century, with wooden beams and artificial mountains of ice. Eventually, instead of ice and sleds, tracks and carriages were constructed to carry screaming riders across the Russian mountains. Even more exhilarating terror came when innovative creators decided to paint scary scenes on the walls that shocked and thrilled riders as they passed by. These became known as dark rides. People were terrified, but they loved it. We haven't just enjoyed physical thrills. Ghost stories were told around the campfire long before we had summer camps. The graveyard poets of the 18th century, who wrote of spiders, bats, and skulls, paved the road for the Gothic novelists of the 19th century like Poe and Shelley. Interesting that they would use Poe as an example, considering we had Pit and the Pendulum as an example of characters being completely afraid. Let's continue. These scary stories provided and continue to deliver intrigue, exhilaration, and a jolt of excitement to our lives. The 19th century also brought the precursors to the haunted attraction industry. Sideshows or freak shows in the museums and houses of oddities have existed since the mid-1800s. Perhaps the most notable is Barnum's American Museum, operated by P.T. Barnum, best known for being half of the Ringling Brothers in Barnum and Bailey Circus. His museum contained things like monkey torsos with fishtails attached and other creatures meant to frighten and startle. Much like modern haunts, customers would line up to challenge themselves and their resilience and dare each other to enter the freak shows and face the scary scenes and abnormalities. The haunted attraction industry has come a long way from fishtails and plastic bats. Modern haunts incorporate Hollywood quality sets and a crazy amount of modern technology, all designed to scare us silly. Let's continue. There's a common belief that if you meet somebody for the first time in a fearful situation, you'll feel more attached or more attracted to that person than you would if you'd met them in low-stress situations. Is there any truth to that? So what they're saying is there's a myth. Let's read about this. There's a myth that the first time you meet somebody, if you go through a scary situation together and you survive, that you'll have some kind of attachment with that person. You'll be a little bit closer. Do you remember that time we almost died? And be like, yeah. And that's your own little link that you have with each other. It's why some people say if you go on a first date, take that first date to a scary movie. Because if he or she gets really scared, you cling on to each other for the rest of your relationship, you'll remember that that person provided you with some kind of safety and helped you when you were afraid. Let's read the science though. Let's read the knowledge. Let's go. One of the reasons people love Halloween is because it produces strong emotional responses. And those responses work to build strong relationships and memories. This is a really great quote. You might want to get this one down. Listen, consider the following quote. When we're happy or afraid, we're releasing powerful hormones like oxytocin that are working to make these moments stick in our brains. So consider the following quote. When we're happy or afraid, we're releasing powerful hormones like oxytocin that are working to make these moments stick in our brains. So this quote clearly shows that fear sticks with us and affects us because of the wirings of our brain. So why do people do dumb things because they're afraid? Because of the wiring of their brains. Because these memories stick with us for a long time. Because when we're afraid, oxytocin pumps into our brain, and that causes us to be more afraid, but more specifically, it makes us remember that for our life. So the next time we get afraid, boom, that oxytocin comes in, it floods our brain, and it fills us with these memories of past hauntings. Really good quote. Let's continue. So we're going to remember the people we're with. If it was a good experience, then we'll remember them fondly and feel close to them, more so than if we were to meet them during some neutral, unexciting event. Shelley Taylor, discussed this in her article, Tend and Befriend, Biobehavioral Basis of Affiliation Under Stress. She shows that we do build a special closeness with those we are with when we are in an excited state, and more importantly, that it can be a really good thing. Listen. We're social and emotional beings. We need each other in times of stress. So the fact that our bodies have evolved to make us sure we feel close to those we're with when afraid makes sense. So yes, take your date to a haunted house or for a ride on a roller coaster. It might be a night you'll never forget. Okay, pretty cool article. I don't know about you, but I've come across 4 or 5 quotes each day, which might be useful for my essay. Now remember, when you write this essay, it's not going to be 10, 20 pages long. I'm going to ask you to write a 2 to 3 page essay, which means I'm going to ask for about 4 quotes, right? You'll use 1 or 2 quotes from The Pit and the Pendulum. You'll use 1 quote from House Taken Over, which means you only need to use 1 or 2 quotes from this scientific article. We already have some great quotes. So again, for tonight's assignment, let me show you again. Let me put it up on our screen. Chrome tab, there it is. Nope, this one. For tonight's assignment, you are going to put 4 quotes from today's reading. Make sure your quote goes after the phrase, consider the following quote, put it in quotation marks, then close your quotation marks. Don't put a period at the end of the quote. After the quotation marks, put your parentheses. Then inside those parentheses, you just put the page number that you took the quote from. You don't write page or PG or PAGE or P or PP, none of that. You just put the number. In this case, it would be 94, 93. After the parentheses, you put the period and you're done. Make sure for your annotation, you're explaining how that quote clearly shows how fear negatively affects people or causes them to do dumb or stupid things. So this quote clearly shows how fear negatively affects everybody because we all have this wiring in our brain. Excellent job, everybody. Again, as always, if you have any questions or problems, please don't hesitate to send me an email and we'll go over it automatically. Just great job. Make sure you have your annotations done for tonight. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.